Today's story is the story of brothers so ruthless and so notorious that the army had to be called in to neutralize them. This is the story of the Mailoni Brothers. Hi friends, welcome to the Ayira Faith channel. I am Ayira and I do post true crime videos every True Crime Tuesdays. So if that's your kind of vibe, please consider subscribing. Today's story happens in Luano village, Luano Valley, all the way in central Zambia. Luano Valley was covered with thick vegetation and expansive jungle that had a lot of trees, a lot of long grass, and a lot of rivers. It also contained a lot of game, which was actually very instrumental to the people of the Luano Valley because they used to go to the jungle to actually hunt these animals. So their main source of living were that they were farmers and hunters. So growing up in Luano village, one would automatically learn these skills, survival skills in the jungle. They were very good trackers because they had to be in order to track animals. They learned how to use weapons such as spears, axes, bows and arrows, muzzles, which are these traditional hunting guns. They also learned how to set traps for animals, and they also used hunting dogs to hunt. This is important because later on in the story, you'll understand why the Mailoni brothers were very difficult to arrest or to catch, because they had learned the terrain, they knew where they are, they had grown up there their whole life, and so they understood everything about Luano Valley and everything about Luano village. They had survival skills, they had hunting skills, and they actually terrorized the village and the villagers for a very long time, for 6 good years. Another thing is that Luano village and Luano Valley was so much isolated from the rest of the country, and they lacked basic social amenities, and so government employees or officials like teachers, doctors, and policemen avoided the area, letting it descend to lawlessness. It was up to the locals and their headmen and their chief to come up with rules and regulations and laws that will help them maintain peace within the area. And also traditional medicine was a thing there. Most government officials, like I said, doctors, avoided the area because of its remoteness and its isolationness. So it's 1986. We meet Janet Njimu. Her husband has just died, and she's left to take care of 4 growing boys, young boys, by the name Stefano, Mailoni, Fabiano, aka Tunda Mailoni, Mika Mailoni, and Nelson Mailoni. So she did her best to provide for her children, but they suffered from abject poverty and also illiteracy. And growing up in the village, the Mailoni brothers were considered very mischievous, all except Nelson, and their ringleader would seem to be Tunda Mailoni. It was thought that Tunda had some undiagnosed mental illness because he used to be very paranoid and be very delusional. He used to see and hear things that do not exist, and he used to then later on act violently towards other people as a reaction of what he was seeing or he was thinking he was seeing. He also seemed to be like the leader of the group, and the boys would get into fights and into altercation. It is said that if you pick a fight with one of the Mailoni brothers, you picked a fight with all 3 of them, with the exception of Nelson, who was much more mild-mannered. And their first act of attack was attacking Nelson, their brother, and their mother when she came to separate them. Tunda was also married. He married a lady in 1997, and they had 4 kids. The lady would later on say that he would sleep with an axe and a sword every night in the bed, and in the middle of the night he would leave every night in the middle of the night and go outside and then come back after a while. And when she would ask him, "What were you doing and where were you?" he would beat her, accusing her of being a Satanist. Sometime in 2006, Tunda got ill, and he and his 2 brothers, Mika and Stefano, visited a witch doctor, apparently for healing. And it is said after the visit from the witch doctor in 2006, things completely changed. the brothers became absolutely violent. They would accost and harass village members and steal from them, break into their houses, steal all items like clothing, utensils, money, food, even livestock, and they would beat up anyone who would try to stop them. They would accost women from the market and take anything that they had bought. Little boys and young men that were coming from the jungle and take away maybe their fish, they're from fishing, or game, wildlife that they had caught that day, and take it away. So slowly but surely, the Mailoni brothers became more than a nuisance in the village, and the villagers were getting angry, so angry. So at some point, the chief of the area visited the people of Mailoni village, the people of Luano village, and they actually complained to the chief. They were like, look, we have an issue here. We have the Mailoni brothers who are a total menace, and you need to do something about them. So the chief, hearing all these complaints from his villagers, got very angry and actually sent a 14-member team to the Mailoni compound to actually bring them to him. So needless to say, the Mailoni brothers would not answer to anyone. Their slogan was that we answer to no one, only God, which is weird because you'll understand later. So anyway, the 14-member team comes to the Mailoni compound, and they tell them, okay, the chief has summoned you, need to come and answer for all the crimes that you've done. And needless to say, the Mailoni brothers, obviously, like expected, they became violent, beat up all the members of the 14-member team, and people actually had to scatter and run away to save their own lives. This was in 2006. Fast forward to 27th May 2007, the Mailoni brothers actually messed with the wrong person. His name was Mr. Roy Mondoka. They entered his farm, his banana plantation, and cut down all the bananas and ransacked and destroyed everything in his farm. Mr. Roy was known in the village as being a very hot-tempered person. So with anger, he went to their compound and told their mother, look, woman, listen, you need to take these boys to a mental institution. Your boys are crazy, and I'm not going to take this nonsense anymore. 39 members of the village had actually assembled, people who were tired, sick and tired. They heard of what the Mailoni brothers had done to Mr. Roy's farm, and they were sick and tired of them. So it was a mob assembled and came to the Mailoni compound, and a fracas ensued. And in the midst, Mr. Roy Mandoko, was killed by one of the Mailoni brothers. Being afraid for their lives and being scared that they had killed someone, so they were fearing the repercussions to come after. They ran away and entered into the jungle. And that is when this whole massacre started happening, because the Mailoni brothers, upon entering the jungle, would now embark on a violent and vengeful mission to try and eradicate the whole village. When the brothers fled to the jungle, Tunda's wife, Erenida, she actually left him and went back to her parents' house. And when the brothers actually heard that she had left and abandoned the marriage and divorced him, they went to her father's house and actually attacked the father and killed the father. This was just the beginning of a killing spree that will terrorize the people of the village of Luano for close to 6 years. They would lay traps for villagers that had gone to visit their farms or their traps to see if they had trapped any animals, and they would actually slaughter these villagers. They had weapons like spears, axes, bows, and arrows, and they would actually stab the villagers not less than 14 times and hack them to death by cutting their throats and cutting their limbs and things like that. So this Mailoni brothers menace became something that was so crucial in the village and something that was so serious that the villagers actually started thinking that they had supernatural powers, because then again they had gone to a witch doctor. They had supernatural powers that was protecting them from any laws and protecting them from being caught. So the villagers resorted to inviting witch doctors into the village to help protect them from the Mailoni brothers. But every time they invited a witch doctor, someone died. Every time they invited a witch doctor, someone died. So it was hopeless for the villagers, and they actually, fearing for their lives, they actually fled from one part of the village, crossed the river, and went to the other part of the village to actually just stay away from the Mailoni brothers, who were considered to be on that other side of the jungle and that other side of the village. So villagers stopped going to their farms. Of course, they were afraid for their lives, and so there was a crisis because there was famine and hunger. People were not working. Remember, their main source of living was hunting and farming. They cannot go to the jungle anymore to get the animals that they were hunting because of the Mailoni brothers. They are in there. They cannot go to the farms because they're afraid for their lives. So the villagers started starving. And the village chief, Mr. Chembe, became very desperate for help because nothing he was doing locally was helping. And so he asked for help from the national government. So the national government sent in the army. Yes, the army, for 3 brothers. Sent them in August of 2011, the first task force. They stayed in the Luano village for a while, but nothing changed. The second task force was brought in. They also stayed there for a while, nothing changed. They couldn't catch the Mailoni brothers. The third task force was sent. Nothing was changing. And we were wondering, people were wondering, why can they catch these people? Because the army was like, we are going to quell a nuisance from 3 boys with bows and arrows. They had actually underestimated the skill set that the Mailoni brothers possessed. So this is why they couldn't catch the Mailoni brothers. Number one, they understood the terrain very, very well. They grew up there, remember? They were skilled hunters. They knew where to hide. They knew how to hide. They knew how to camouflage, how to cover their tracks, either with leaves or with dirt. And sometimes they were very intelligent because they used to change the soles of their shoes to face the opposite direction. So that if they're walking from left to right, and you find their tracks, you would think they are walking from right to left because they changed the sole of their feet. The front part faced backward and the back part faced frontwards. Another thing, they used to kidnap villagers when they went to check their traps or to their farms and force them to give them updates about the army and what the army was planning. And then thereafter, they would kill those villagers. And they also used to use smokeless fire to cook. They were very smart, these brothers. They understood the terrain. They knew how to survive in the jungle. And it was very difficult to catch them. The weather, they were very used to the weather of the jungle because it was the climate there. It was very harsh. The jungle was full of tsetse flies. And when it was raining, it was very cold and very muddy. When it was not raining, when it was hot, it was too hot. And the soldiers found it very difficult to survive there. But the Mailoni brothers, having grown up there, they knew exactly what they were doing. So finally, Task Force 4 was brought in. And when Task Force 4 was brought in, it was brought in with a change of leadership, a change of command. There were 2 new generals that were put in charge of Task Force 4. And they made some substantial changes to the way the army was operating that ensured that the Mailoni brother menace was quelled. Number one, they requested for fresh soldiers. They didn't want the soldiers that had been there for a while, maybe in Task Force 1 or Task Force 2, because these soldiers had it in their heads, and also the villagers, that the Mailoni brothers were being helped by some supernatural powers and that it was impossible to defeat them because of this. So their morale was already down. They believed they did not have the skill to fight against any supernatural power that these boys were using, because it was rumored that they would appear and disappear and even camouflage and change and become trees, which was a lie. They were just difficult to find because these brothers understood the terrain and had the skill to survive. So a completely new task force with new, fresh minds. Number 2, they decided that the villagers need to camouflage and act like the soldiers, need to camouflage and act like the villagers. They let them grow out their hair, and for the men, their beards. They told them, let your hair and your beards grow, ditch the uniforms and the boots. You have to integrate and assimilate with the villagers and look like them. Because with their uniforms, they used to stand out. They cannot camouflage, they used to stand out. The Mailoni brothers, of course, having different vantage points, would actually spot them easily because of their uniform. So they were told, ditch the uniforms. And most of the villagers used to have own bicycles that they would use to go to the farm and carry produce from the farm to the house. So the generals requested the army to buy the soldiers, each soldier a bicycle, so that they would look like the villagers. And the clothes they were wearing were not supposed to be flashy, flamboyant, or expensive. They were supposed to be very cheap clothes, and sometimes they even had them cut up the clothes in tatters so that they would better camouflage and look like an actual villager. The villagers there wore they wore very tattered clothes, and so they had to look like them, so that the Mailoni brothers would not know who is a soldier and who is a villager. Another thing they did is they introduced curfews in the village, a very early curfew, and anyone who was found outside at that time was arrested. Another thing they did was they started escorting villagers to go and check their farms and their traps. This stops the Mailoni brothers from kidnapping the villagers and actually forcing them to tell them updates about the army or what they know, any information they could collect from them, and then actually killing these villagers. Another thing that they did, they decided to set camps in strategic position inside the jungle. The earlier task forces, what they used to do was they used to leave one central camp, a main camp, in the morning, go to patrol into the jungle, and then come back in the evening. This was found not to be effective, and they actually just set up different camps in different areas of the jungle, and a group of soldiers would stay in that camp for 3 days, and on the 4th day they would exchange with another group of soldiers and go to a different camp. This enabled them, the longer they stayed in the area, the longer they learned the area, and the longer they knew how to identify the better they knew how to identify what is out of place and what is usual. And another thing which I think was the most important is that they instilled religion in them. They told them, you are doing a divine duty from God. You are anointed to do this, and God is on your side. Believe in God, trust in Him, and if you do your work very well, He will allow you to succeed. So they defeated that mentality or that rumor about witchcraft and brought in a divine being, which was God, and which bolstered the army and gave them like a lot of strength and a lot of confidence to go after the Mailoni brothers. It removed the fear in them. So needless to say, the task force worked for 54 days. Task Force 4 worked for 54 days with these new rules and regulations. On 24th June 2017, that is almost 7 years after 2013, sorry, that is almost 7 years after the Mailoni brothers, the 3 Mailoni brothers went into the jungle. A couple of villagers wanted to go and check their traps. So they requested for escort from the soldiers. So the soldiers, having their guns, of course, hidden, and the normal civilian wear, escorted the villagers to go and check their farms and their traps. And in the middle of the exercise, they actually found a camp that was clearly not a soldier's camp or an army camp. And it was clearly belonging to the Mailoni brothers. They found sleeping bags, articles of clothing, shoes, some traces of food, some traces of fire that had been put out. And it seemed like the ashes were still warm. It seemed like they had just left the area. So the 3 soldiers decided to follow the tracks and hunt down the Mailoni brothers. So at first there was a soldier in the front, then behind him a couple of villagers, then in the middle another second soldier, then behind the second soldier a couple of villagers again, and then in the last person was also a soldier. So the villagers were in between the soldiers, and they actually followed the tracks, which I don't know what happened this time around. I think the Mailoni brothers were feeling a little bit confident and arrogant that if they had not been caught by now, they would not be caught. So I think they were a little bit careless. They followed the tracks, and actually at the end of the tracks, they found the Mailoni brothers seated there, 3 of them. And when the villagers saw them, of course, they turned to run and made a noise. So the Mailoni brothers heard them and turned, saw them, and obviously they attacked them. They had spears, they had axes, they had pangas. They attacked the soldiers. And the soldier who was at the front, his name was Chapela Joy. I remember him talking in an interview and saying, when I saw them, and they looked at me and they stood up and they charged towards me, I knew 3 things. Number 1, I cannot outrun them. Number 2, if I don't kill them, they will kill me. So I had to kill them. And number 3, the villagers were depending on me. I had to protect the villagers. They had confidence in me. So I had to stand my ground and I had to kill the brothers. So he shot them dead. All 3 of them, right there and there. And that is how the Mailoni brothers, the notorious Mailoni brothers, killed after almost 7 years of terror and death in the Mailoni village. So their bodies were carried to the village, and when the villagers saw that these were the Mailoni brothers and actually poked them to confirm that they were actually dead, the whole village broke out in celebration. They were finally free from this menace. They were finally at peace. They could finally breathe. They were free to go to their farms, to go to the forest. And after almost 7 long years, these Mailoni brothers were dead. The bodies were flown to the barracks where their mother actually identified them, identified that this is Mika, this is Alfonsi, and this is Tunda Mailoni. And they were actually buried in unmarked graves and in an area that was not disclosed. They were buried by the army. And this is because normally when someone is buried in an unmarked grave, just like the British did to Dedan Kimathi, it is for them to distinguish that attitude of martyrdom, you know. So if there is a clearly set out marked grave that this person lies here, people who will hear the story of that person in future would actually idolize him. Since they know where he's buried, they would idolize him, consider him a legend, whether it's good, the person did good things or bad things. Because I've seen this happen even for serial killers. Jeffrey Dahmer, people sent love letters to him. John Wayne Gacy. As in, people are crazy a little out there. I don't know. Yeah, people are a little bit crazy. So they wanted to extinguish the attitude of martyrdom. They didn't want people to consider these men as martyrs because they had actually terrorized the whole village for 6 good years. They buried them somewhere undisclosed and in unmarked graves, and that was the end of the Mailoni brothers. Their articles, the spears that they used and the weapons and the articles of clothing, articles of sleeping and utensils that they were using in the jungle can be found until today in the Lusaka National Museum. And there is a whole wall dedicated to the Mailoni brothers and to the terror that they unleashed to the Luano Valley people from 2007, 27th May 2007 to 24th June 2013. So guys, if you've liked today's story, please consider subscribing to this channel. I'll be here next Tuesday with another true crime video, every True Crime Tuesday. And so see you soon and see you there. Bye.